Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon, and today we have a very interesting video. I'm going to discuss or even respond to something that Post-Disclosure World, aka UFO Jesus, aka Ryan Robbins, posted on Twitter, which I'll put a little thing right there so you can see what his actual post was. There's a video that he made in regards to this, a 4-minute video, and Ryan has kindly let me use that video here so I can discuss the topics here in this video. So first, check his video out.
So here's a hypothetical question. Let's say a post-disclosure world dawns. We get concrete evidence that's indisputable that our world is being engaged by non-human intelligence. And so the world, all 8+ billion of us, want to learn more about the entities that are engaging our world. Now, a lot of experiencers would claim that they're the conduit for which we're going to learn about this presence. So here's my question. If humanity is like, okay, thank you for telling us what you've experienced, but we want to hear from the aliens themselves, what would the experiencers say at that moment? And wouldn't this scenario create a huge disparity among people? All of a sudden, the greatest revelation in the history of mankind dawns, and now all the experiencers, theoretically, are put on a much higher pedestal than everyone else. Now, would the phenomenon itself feel good about creating such disparity as this? And if the phenomenon is all love and light, then my question would be, wouldn't that create a lack of equilibrium from one person to the next? Because it would suggest a special relationship with the phenomenon itself that only a select few has, and would create potentially a sense of elitism amongst those that are experiencers versus those that are not, which seems to betray a lot of the mantras we hear from some people that the phenomenon is enlightened and on a higher plane than human consciousness. And what would happen if we finally did get open contact and the phenomenon itself, or components of it, since I don't think it's all one thing, would proclaim that some people that say they're experiencers are actually not experiencers? Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Because I don't think people think through the shit show that could be inevitable in a post-disclosure world. They don't think through the amount of incoherence that could become a theme of this transition as it pertains to experiencers potentially. And I'm not making any conclusive assessments. I'm just trying to raise some things to contemplate it as it pertains to a post-disclosure world. But from my perspective, as much as I respect that people have allegedly had contact with the non-human intelligence, I would still be like, that's great and that's interesting. And I'm reading John Mack's book Abduction now, and I'm reading the literature, but I want to hear from them firsthand as opposed to secondhand. See, that would be my emphasis. And I'm not saying that to diminish the amazing experiences experiencers have had, but if clarity is my priority, and diminishing subjectivity as much as possible is my priority, then it only makes sense that in a post-disclosure world, I would be keen on having the phenomenon itself have open contact as opposed to going through secondhand testimony. So I'm just gonna let this sit on Twitter and let the chips fall where they may.
So that was Ryan's video. Here's the response I did on Twitter. But, again, I wanted to give a more clear and detailed response to his video by making my own video here discussing some of these ideas. So, one of the ideas that he poses is that, if we're looking at experiencers as conduits, in a sense, for the phenomenon, is this going to create a disparity? So there's a few different ways to look at this. I would hope in a post-disclosure world, that there is open contact. Again, that might be an entire process. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. But the idea of, open contact, maybe it's going to happen in stages and phases. Maybe experiencers are going to play a role in that. We don't know. It's really too early to tell. Maybe experiencers have been playing a role in that this whole while. But, he poses the concern that, yes, it's great to hear from experiencers, but, him and everybody is going to want to hear from the actual UFO phenomenon and the intelligences itself. And I would say, I think that we shouldn't expect anything less. I think at that point, after disclosure, there should increasingly be levels of communication openly. Again, that's an ideal. Who knows how this is going to roll out and play out. There's so many things that can occur. But I would hope at that point that the phenomenon would start to engage humanity in a more direct and collective way, rather than having this issue of, having conduits or the phenomenon only having contact with the select people, and then those select people having to communicate to the rest of humanity. Again, hopefully that's not even an issue after disclosure. I really hope it's not. Again, maybe it's not going to happen overnight where, there's disclosure, it's announced, and the next day there's landings and press conferences with ETs or aliens or what have you, or interdimensional time travelers, whatever people speculate is behind the UFO phenomenon, right? So let's, for argument's sake, say they're extraterrestrials. I don't think, after disclosure the next day there's going to be interviews and meetings with extraterrestrials. For all I know, maybe there will be, right? But I think that's going to be a whole process, and maybe to some extent experiences are going to play a role in that, but I would hope that that's all minimal. I think humanity at that point should expect that the phenomenon that's been engaging with us to the extent it has up to this point, when we've done our part and done the disclosure aspect of it collectively as humanity, that the phenomenon will respond in kind and engage us openly. And if it doesn't, should we be concerned? Is it deceptive? At that point, even as an experiencer or somebody who's had contact, yeah, I'd be concerned, and I'd maybe frustrated. And Ryan brings up a lot of other points. Is the phenomenon intending to create this disparity by operating in the way it has and maybe will continue to? I think it's too hard to kind of speculate on the intentions of the phenomenon, good, bad, or indifferent. There seems to be a lot of indifference. I know during contact experiences, even in my own case, there seemed to be, positive inclinations of the phenomenon. But again, they're all overall bigger picture. It's too hard to judge, really, I would say, the intent of the phenomenon. If it's intending to do one thing or another, it may not be so clear to us, especially if it is operating on a higher level, which Ryan goes on to speculate. if the phenomenon is working on a higher plane or a higher level of understanding, then how could it be that we're in such a scenario where it could create disparity and even indifference? And again, these are good questions. These are great questions, and I think it's too early to tell anything. Unfortunately, I think we have to be in more direct contact with the content. Or let's just say we have to be in those scenarios, and it's going to be a retrospective thing, really, because we can't really tell as we're in the gist of everything going on how it's going to play out, and if the phenomenon was doing it from a place of our best interest, or maybe that's not even part of the equation, right? Another interesting point Ryan brings out here is, if after open contact, the phenomenon, basically people who are claiming to be experiencers, the phenomenon's like, no, they're not actually experiencers. Maybe there might be some of that. I don't know. I almost think that the phenomenon, in a sense, is not going to be directly involved in such kind of like petty human stuff, but who knows? That's a possibility. It's hard for me to imagine anything like that unfolding, but who knows? I think it's going to be more of a human thing on the human side of doing that, where we'll probably be more cognizant and jumping on that, rather than the phenomenon like calling people out. I don't know, unless again it's a huge and important case, maybe, right? Like Travis Walton or other huge cases where the phenomenon will be like, that wasn't us. That would be super interesting. But again, one of the main points that Ryan is making here is that he would prefer open contact and the phenomenon engaging humanity directly, and again collectively and openly, rather than having to go through experiencers and conduits and secondhand accounts from people. And I completely agree. I mean, I've had experiences, but I don't have all the answers. And I think that experiencers should be, humble and modest about their experiences, and realize those experiences are, for what they are, rather than, my personal experience or this experience's personal experience represents the phenomenon's relationship with the entire humanity, right? Those are personal experiences, and they represent that one, or that interaction between that individual and the phenomenon. But it's a whole other thing to consider the interaction and relationship between the phenomenon and the collective, planet, right? So there's really a lot to go on there. I mean, I think this could be an entire podcast or discussion. And I think we did touch on some of these elements a little bit on the panel that we did on UFO Jesus's channel, or Post-Disclosure World, during the Contact Week. We touched, I think, a little bit on some of this. But again, just to kind of sum it all up, yeah, I think that at that point, after disclosure, and I made a video about this, the phenomenon's accountable, in regards into how we perceive it, as the phenomenon is this advanced intelligence, and it's engaging with us, probably very well knowing how we're going to respond. And in that, I think that the phenomenon has a responsibility, in a sense, to kind of be transparent to the degree where there's a mutual understanding. I think, again, technically speaking, the phenomenon doesn't necessarily owe us anything, and vice versa, right? So, but idealistically, I would think at that point, the phenomenon kind of actually running this whole show for the most part, being the more advanced intelligence, seemingly, that there'd be some kind of mutual transparency as to, what is going on, what is behind the UFO phenomenon, their intentions, and so on. And that if we didn't get that, yeah, there's definitely cause for concern, right? Because if we've at that point done our part and done this disclosure, and they're still not participating openly with us, but they're still engaging certain individuals and going around the planet and, checking out different nuclear facilities and, facilitating sightings, but the transparency isn't there, then, yeah, I mean, even as somebody who's had the contact experiences, I'd be concerned, I'd be frustrated, right? I think rightly so, because if we've done our part as humanity at that point and done the disclosure, and there's no open contact and engagement, then we are going to have this disparity that Ryan is concerned about. And at that point, yeah, I think that, even if the phenomenon is not intending for that disparity to be there, it's going to be there to an extent. And the phenomenon being an advanced intelligence should be able to understand that that is what the scenario is going to be for us as humans. It's at that point somewhat liable or responsible for our perceptions of it, and us going forward from there, and how should we as humans respond to that at that point deception, right? Maybe deception is not the exact terminology, but kind of leaving us in the dark. That is a concern, and that is going to affect how we respond as a civilization, and it should, right? We should take that stuff seriously and act appropriately given the current conditions. And again, there's the arguments that maybe it's just beyond our understanding and how they're operating. Well, you know what? That might be the case, but I still think that the right thing to do would be to work with us somehow and openly at that point. And if people are distrustful at that point of the phenomenon because of its lack of transparency and interaction, it's warranted. And that's the unfortunate reality of the scenario. And I'm saying this as somebody who's had a ton of positive contact experiences. And that being said, that's why I think that during an open contact or during a disclosure scenario, that there are going to be gradual levels of increased contact that leads to an open contact event and scenario. And it might take a little time, right? I don't think it's going to take one day or 1 week. I think it will be a gradual process of sorts. So we also have to consider that. And I'm optimistic. I'm somewhat hopeful that at the point of disclosure, the phenomenon is going to respond in kind to our participation in disclosure and in contact. And if that, reciprocation is not there, yeah, I'd be a little concerned, right? Like, why are you leaving us hanging, dude? Seriously. And again, these are just my rambling thoughts on Ryan's video. I like these little tweets and videos that Ryan makes. I like his approach to creating questions and critical thinking, and I think that these are important questions moving forward. And I think that these kind of questions are telling to where we are in the conversation opposed to 10, 20, 30 years ago, where the conversations are coming this far and we're really having to think about, this could be right around the corner at this point. The phenomenon can end the whole charade at any given moment, literally. And that's a whole nother topic. But this disparity thing, I will say before I end this video, I'm sorry, I'm kind of really going on a rant here, that there's always kind of been this UFO messiah thing, as Grant Cameron had kind of coined that term for managing magic, the UFO messiah complex, where you've had the contactees and experiencers. Certainly not all of them. Obviously, an exception is somebody like Dorothy Ezat, who's having these incredible contact experiences, and she wasn't going out preaching and putting herself out there as an authority on the UFO subject just because she was an experiencer. And she still managed to kind of get her thoughts and message out there. Because, like I said, there has been this disparity to a degree where you have people with questionable cases like Stan Romanek and Dr. Jonathan Reed, where they had these experiences and that put them front and center as authorities in the UFO field for a short period of time. And there's been plenty of other experiencers or contactees, over the last several decades, since the 1950s, really, who have come to prominence in the UFO subject because of their contact, whether it was genuine contact or whether it was hoaxes. Like, Billy Meyer's a perfect example, who's kind of a mix of both, I think, where he probably had some genuine contact, and then there was some that was obviously fabricated, and he became a somewhat prominent figure to an extent. But again, there's been others where that has been the case. And just because somebody is an experiencer does not make them an authority in the UFO subject. There's all different levels to that, because you have somebody like Dr. Stephen Greer, obviously, right, where he speaks very authoritatively about the phenomenon, about UFOs, and kind of everything that goes with that. He's a very unique case because he did speak with hundreds and hundreds of insiders who gave him information, so he was able to put a clear picture together on some of the secrecy aspects. But at the same time, he does somewhat speak for the phenomenon, saying the phenomenon is this, the phenomenon is that. And I can understand why people do that. When you have these interactions, you have a sense of what is going on in your own mind, of how you see everything. And maybe there's partial truth to that, right? And say that the UFO phenomenon represents different intelligences. Maybe what Dr. Greer is saying truly represents what one subset of the UFO phenomenon is trying to communicate to humanity, right? And maybe he has part of that right. But either way, you have these experiences, and it gives you this conviction to a sense, and it's somewhat personal, and I think even some of it is subconscious. And you have an experience, and for you, it gives you these insights and realizations, and I could see how it's easily projected, and then maybe even bleeds into other aspects of your thinking, and so there's a lot to unpack in that whole thing there, and there's that can be an entire video within itself. So again, just because somebody's a contactee or an experiencer, it does not make them an authority on the entire UFO subject, unless they're also a UFO researcher who's well-versed in every other aspect of the UFO subject, which there's a few experiences out there who are well-versed in UFO research as well, but definitely not all. And we have to consider that. So that's some thought on the disparity. That disparity has always been there a little bit, right, with the UFO messiahs, or contactees and experiencers. As the subject gets more mainstream, that could be exaggerated, as everything in the mainstream media tends to be. So, these are all legitimate concerns, and, we're just going to have to see where it goes. Sorry for rambling on so long about all that stuff. There's really a lot to go on in every little part of that subject in these questions. So again, maybe I'll end up having another conversation with Ryan, UFO Jesus, about this in future panel talks or videos. Who knows? That'd be awesome. If not, I'd love to see other people even respond to this video or do similar videos, kind of exploring some of these questions, ideas, and concerns. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time. Take care.